Captain Hyan Woo Kim stood before the Galactic Council chamber and felt the weight of 8 billion human lives pressing down on his shoulders. The massive circular room stretched out before him, filled with representatives from dozens of alien species. Above him, the transparent dome showed the endless darkness of space, dotted with distant stars that seemed to mock his efforts at diplomacy. He had been doing this job for 3 years now. 3 years of talking, negotiating, and smiling at creatures who looked at humanity like children playing at civilization. The council chamber smelled strange to human senses. A mixture of methane from the Thrain delegates and the sharp mineral scent that followed the Velern. Everywhere they went, Hyan Woo cleared his throat and activated the translation device on his collar. His words would be converted into hundreds of languages simultaneously, though he doubted many would actually listen. They never really did. Honored members of the Galactic Council, he began, keeping his voice steady and diplomatic. Earth presents Proposal 7s and 4 regarding mineral rights in contested border zones. We believe that fair distribution of resources benefits all member species and strengthens the bonds of our great alliance. A clicking sound echoed through the chamber. Hyan Woo recognized it immediately as Velern laughter. The insectoid species dominated the left side of the room, their chitinous bodies gleaming under the artificial lights. They looked like massive praying mantises, but with 4 arms instead of 2, and eyes that reflected light like polished black stones. Ambassador, Kickstar rose from his seat. The Velern moved with disturbing grace despite their size. Stood. Nearly 3 meters tall, his armor-like exoskeleton decorated with scars from countless battles. The Velern were proud of their military history. They wore their violence like medals. The human speaks of fairness, Kickstar said, his voice coming through the translator as a harsh, buzzing sound. How amusing. Your species has been part of this council for only 15 years. We Velorn have maintained order in this galaxy for over 3,000 years. You do not understand fairness. You understand only weakness. Hyan Woo felt his jaw tighten, but forced himself to remain calm. Ambassador Juwon Park, seated behind him in the human delegation area, touched his arm gently. A reminder to stay professional, to not rise to the bait. We understand cooperation, Hyan Woo replied. When Earth joined this council, we came in peace. We dismantled our military fleets. We turned our weapons factories into medical facilities. We did this because we believed in the council's promise of protection and mutual respect. More clicking laughter from the Velern section. Several other species joined in with their own versions of amusement. The Korbaks, bird-like creatures covered in silver feathers, ruffled their wings in what Hyan Woo had learned was their equivalent of a dismissive gesture. That is precisely your problem, human, said Council Speaker Vorneth. Korbaks who had held his position for 60 years. You believe, you hope, you trust. These are not qualities that ensure survival in our galaxy. They're qualities that ensure servitude. The session continued for another 2 hours. Hyan Woo presented his proposals, each one carefully crafted by Earth's best diplomatic minds. Each one was rejected or ignored. When the council finally adjourned, he felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Jiwon walked beside him as they left the chamber. She was older than Hyan Woo, in her late 50s, with gray streaking through her black hair. She had been one of the first humans to meet the Velern, back when first contact seemed like humanity's greatest achievement. They're getting worse, she said quietly, once they were in the privacy of Earth's delegation quarters. Did you notice how Kickstar kept looking at the star charts behind your presentation? Hyan Woo had noticed. The charts showed human colony. Worlds, including New Jeju, a planet rich in rare minerals that Earth had spent 20 years terraforming. The Velern had been asking questions about New Jeju for months now. Commander Daehin Choi was waiting for them in the security office. He was a former soldier, one of the few Earth still employed. His job was to protect the diplomatic team, but Hyan Woo could see the frustration in his eyes. Daehyun had never agreed with Earth's decision to demilitarize. We picked up Velern transmissions, Daehyun said without preamble, encrypted, but our systems caught fragments. They're mobilizing fleet elements near the outer rim, that's close to our territory. Dr. Mingy Lee looked up from her workstation. She was the team xenobiologist. responsible for understanding alien cultures and psychology. Her face showed concern that bordered on fear. I've been analyzing Velaran behavior patterns, she said. This matches what they did before conquering the Thrain homeworld 70 years ago. First comes mockery. Then comes an impossible demand. Then comes war. Juan sat down heavily. They wouldn't. We're council members. There are laws, protections. The Velaran wrote most of those laws, Dehain said. And they've found loopholes in every single one. As if summoned by their conversation, an emergency communication request flashed on the main screen. It was marked with the Velaran Empire's seal. Hyenwu accepted the call. Kickstar's face filled the screen, his mandibles clicking together in what might have been a smile. Behind him, Hyenwu could see what looked like a military command center. Captain Kim, the Velaran ambassador, said, I wanted to personally deliver a message to your people. The Velaran Empire has decided that the planet you call New Jeju sits in a region of strategic importance. The Council has reviewed our claim and found it valid. We have 30 days to evacuate all human presence from that world. This is not negotiable. Hyenwu felt ice form in his stomach. Ambassador New Jeju has 8 million human colonists. We've been there for 2 decades. Can't just 30 days, Captain. Be grateful we're giving you that much time. The Valoran could simply take what we want. We're offering you a chance to leave peacefully. I suggest you take it. The transmission ended. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Dehain slammed his fist against the wall. This is what happens, he said, his voice shaking with anger. This is what happens when you throw away your weapons and trust in the kindness of strangers. We made ourselves prey. Juan looked at Hyenwu. What do we do? Hyenwu thought about New Jeju. He had visited it once 5 years ago. Beautiful world, with purple oceans and twin moons. The colonists had built cities there, farms, schools. Children had been born there who had never seen Earth. It was home to 8 million people who trusted that their government would protect them. He reached for the communication console and opened a channel to Earth's defense ministry. It was a small department now, barely funded, almost forgotten. This is Captain Kim, he said when the connection went through. I need to speak to whoever's in charge of what's left of our military. We have a problem. A big one. The junior officer on the other end looked confused. Sir, we don't really have a military anymore. We have a few patrol ships for asteroids and pirates, but nothing that could I know what we have, Hyenwu interrupted. I also know what's coming for us. Get me your commanding officer now. He ended the call and looked at his team. Outside the window, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the struggles of the beings who lived beneath them. Somewhere out there, Velaran warships were preparing for conquest. And Earth had nothing to stop them with except words and hope. Those had never been enough. Colonel Sujin Han had not worn her military uniform in 6 years. It felt strange on her shoulders now, heavier than she remembered. She stood in what was left of Earth's Central Defense Command, a building that had been mostly converted into a museum. The operations center where she now stood was supposed to be a historical exhibit. Instead, it had been hastily reactivated, its old screens flickering to life after years of darkness. President Tae Yang Noon sat at the head of the emergency council table. He looked tired. He had won his election 3 years ago on a platform of eternal peace, of redirecting military funding to education and healthcare. Now he stared at a holographic display showing New Jeju and its 8 million inhabitants, and Sujin could see the weight of impossible choices crushing him. Tell me our options, the president said quietly. Sujin pulled up the military assessment. The numbers were brutal. We have 12 active warships. 8 are patrol craft designed to handle asteroid mining disputes. 3 are science vessels we retrofitted with basic weapons. 1 is a command ship from 40 years ago that we kept in orbit as a memorial. That's it. That's Earth's entire military. Lieutenant Borakong, one of the few young officers still in service, added her analysis. Was 26 years old, and had joined the service because she loved history, not because she expected to ever fight. The Velaran fleet near our border consists of approximately 200 warships. Each one outguns our best ship by a factor of 10. If they decide to attack, we can't stop them. President Taeyong closed his eyes. Sujin had known him for 20 years. They had both survived the civil war that tore Earth apart for decades ago. That war had killed 2 billion people and taught humanity a terrible lesson about the cost of violence. The entire world had agreed, never again. They had dismantled their weapons, destroyed their war machines, and promised themselves that they had evolved beyond such barbarism. We could evacuate, someone suggested. Civilian advisor whose name Sujin didn't remember. 30 days is enough time to get most people off New Jeju. To where? Bora asked. Our colony ships are slow. We'd need months to evacuate 8 million people. And even if we could, where would they go? Every human world is vulnerable now. If we abandon New Jeju, what's to stop the Velern from taking Earth itself next? The room fell silent. They all knew the answer. Nothing. Nothing would stop the Velern, except force, and Earth no longer had force to offer. Sujin pulled up another file. There's something else you should know. I've been going through old records. Before we joined the Galactic Council, before the Civil War, Earth had a military that could have challenged the Velern. We had weapons they've never seen, strategies they wouldn't understand. We weren't weak. We chose to become peaceful. Because war nearly destroyed us, President Taeyong said. 2 billion dead, Sujin. Cities burned. Children starving. We swore we would never go back to that. I remember, Sujin replied. I lost my family in the Seoul bombings. I know what war costs, but I also know what surrender costs. Right now, the Velern are betting that we've forgotten how to fight. Hyenwoo's voice came through the communication system from the council station. Mr. President, I've been trying to rally support among other council members. It's not working. The Thrain are sympathetic but won't risk Velern retaliation. The Korvax say this is a legal matter and they can't interfere. Everyone is afraid. Did anyone offer to help? The president asked. A Thrain trade minister spoke to me privately, Hyenwoo said. He told me the Velern have done this 47 times before. 47 species forced to surrender territory or face destruction. Sometimes the species fought back. None of them won. The Velern have been conquering their way across the galaxy for 3,000 years, and the council just watches it happen. President Taeyong stood and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the lights of the city. Millions of people going about their lives, unaware that everything was about to change. He had promised these people peace. He had promised their children would never know war. Contact New Jeju, he said finally. Tell them to begin evacuation procedures. We'll save who we can. No, the word came from the communication system, but it wasn't Hyenwoo's voice. The screen shifted to show a woman in her 50s, standing in what looked like a government building. This is Governor Yoonji Nam of New Jeju. Mr. President, with respect, we're not leaving. Governor, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, Yoonji interrupted. You're going to surrender our world without a fight. You're going to prove to every hostile species in this galaxy that humans will roll over when threatened. Well, I'm telling you right now, the people of New Jeju won't. I'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees. The transmission ended. Sujin saw the president's shoulders slump. He looked like a man being torn apart from the inside. Bora was working at a computer terminal, pulling up old files. Sir, I've been studying pre-contact military records. Earth's industrial capacity is still enormous. Build starships for civilian use, massive cargo vessels, mining equipment, orbital stations. The factories still exist. The knowledge still exists. We chose not to build weapons, but we still remember how. Building a fleet takes years, someone objected. Building it the old way took years, Bora countered. But we have automated factories now. AI-assisted manufacturing. Techniques we developed for civilian production. If we redirect everything, if we prioritize military construction above all else, we could have a real fleet in months, not years. President Taeyong looked at Sujin. Is she right? I think so, Sujin said carefully. But it would mean transforming our entire economy into a war machine. Every resource directed to the military. It would mean becoming exactly what we swore we'd never be again. It would mean survival, Bora said quietly. The president walked back to the table and sat down. He looked at each person in the room. Then at the screen showing Hyenwoo on the council station. Finally, he looked at the holographic image of New Jeju, spinning peacefully in space, unaware of its doom. 40 years ago, I watched my city burn, President Taeyang said softly. Watch people I love die in the flames, I promised myself. That I would spend the rest of my life making sure that never happened again. I believed that peace was possible. I believed that if we showed the galaxy, our humanity, our compassion, our willingness to trust, they would respond in kind. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was harder. I was wrong. The galaxy doesn't reward peace. It punishes it. The Veleran look at our kindness and see weakness. They look at our trust and see opportunity. They think we forgot how to fight. They're about to learn that we simply chose not to. Sujin felt something shift in the room, a change in the air, in the way people held themselves. Colonel Han, you're being promoted to General effective immediately. Begin preparations for total military mobilization. Contact every factory, every shipyard, every manufacturing facility on Earth and in the colonies. I want production schedules for warships on my desk in 6 hours. He turned to Bora. Lieutenant, I'm assigning you to intelligence. Find every piece of information we have on Veleran tactics, psychology, weaknesses. If we're going to war, we're going to win, Mr. President, Hyanwu said from the screen. What should I tell the council? Tae-young looked directly at the camera. Tell them humanity tried peace. We offered friendship. We extended trust. The Veleran responded with threats and ultimatums. Tell them that Earth chooses peace. But we will not choose surrender. If the Veleran want New Jeju, they'll have to take it from us. That's going to cost them more than they ever imagined. The meeting broke up, people rushing to their new assignments. Sujin stayed behind for a moment, looking at the old uniform she wore. She had hoped never to need it again, but sometimes hope wasn't enough. Outside, the first emergency broadcasts were going out. Factories were being contacted. Retired soldiers were being called back to service. And on New Jeju, 8 million. Colonists looked up at their purple sky and prepared to defend their home. The 30-day countdown had begun. Day 31 came like an executioner's blade. The Veleran fleet materialized at the edge of New Jeju's solar system precisely on schedule. 200 warships, each one a masterpiece of military engineering, designed and refined over thousands of years of conquest. They moved in perfect formation, confident and unhurried. Why rush? They had done this 47 times before. Admiral Jin Ho-sung watched from the bridge of the Earth defense ship Unity. He was 72 years old. 3 weeks ago, because Earth needed someone who remembered real war. His hair was white, his hands showed the tremor of age, but his mind was still sharp. Now that mind was calculating the odds of survival, and the numbers were not encouraging. Sir, enemy fleet holding position at the outer marker, reported the tactical officer. They're scanning the planet. No weapons charged yet. Jin-ho studied the display. The Veleran were being cautious, professional. They had detected Earth's 12 ships in orbit around New Jeju, but those ships must look like toys to them. 12 against 200. It wasn't even a fair fight. His communication officer looked up. Sir, we're being hailed by the Veleran flagship. Put him through. The screen showed a Veleran commander, his exoskeleton decorated with golden markers that indicated high rank. Human vessels. This is Supreme Commander the Zol of the Veleran Armada. You are in violation of Council Decree. Withdraw immediately, or be destroyed. Ginho kept his voice calm. This is Admiral Sung of the Earth's Defense Force. New Jeju is a sovereign human colony. We will not abandon our citizens. If you attack, we will defend. The Veleran commander's mandibles clicked, and what Jinho had learned was an expression of amusement. Admiral, I respect your courage. It is wasted, but I respect it. You have 12 ships. I have 200. This will not be a battle. This will be an execution. Stand down. No. For a moment, the Veleran commander seemed genuinely surprised. Then he made a gesture, and the transmission ended. On the tactical display, the Veleran fleet began to move forward, weapon systems powering up. All ships. This is Unity Actual. Jinho broadcast on the fleet channel. Remember your training. Remember why we're here. We're buying time for the evacuation shuttles. Every minute we survive is another 100 civilians who escape. Make them count. The Velern opened fire first. Their weapons were beautiful and terrible, beams of focused energy that could cut through ship hulls like paper. The Earth ships scattered, their captains doing their best to avoid the initial barrage. 2 ships weren't fast enough. They exploded in brilliant flashes, their crews dead before they could even scream. 10 ships left. On the planet below, the bombardment began. Velern doctrine was efficient and brutal. They targeted population centers first, aiming to break the will to resist. The city of New Sol, home to 2 million people, was hit by an orbital strike that vaporized everything in a 5-kilometer radius. The shockwave killed hundreds of thousands more. Captain Unibeak led a squadron of 12 fighters, small craft that had been hastily armed with missiles. She was 31 years old, a pilot who had spent her career flying cargo runs between colonies. 3 weeks ago, she had been hauling medical supplies. Now she was flying into hell. "Gold Squadron, form up on me," she ordered, her voice tight with fear she refused to show. "We're going for their closest cruiser. Target the engines." The fighters accelerated, their pilots knowing this was probably a suicide run. The Velern cruiser they targeted saw them coming and opened up with point defense weapons. 3 fighters disappeared in explosions. 4 more were damaged and had to break off. That left Una and 4 others. They closed to weapons range and fired everything they had. Missiles streaked across space and slammed into the cruiser's engine section. For a moment, Una felt a surge of hope. Then she saw the damage assessment. They had barely scratched the armor. "Gold Leader, this is Gold 5, called one of her wingmen. I'm out of missiles, and my ship is falling apart." "It's been an honor." Before Una could respond, Gold 5 accelerated directly into the cruiser's bridge. The explosion tore open a section of the hull, causing real damage. The cruiser began to drift, its command systems compromised. Una blinked away tears. All remaining fighters returned to base. "We did what we could." Of her squadron of 12, only 3 made it back. On the ground, the survivors fled to underground shelters. Governor Yunji Nam stood in the planetary command center, watching her world die on a dozen screens. The cities were burning. The farmlands were being systematically destroyed. The Velern weren't just conquering New Jeju, they were making an example of it. "How many did we evacuate?" she asked. 3 million, her aide replied. 5 million are still on planet. Most are in the shelters, but those won't hold forever. Yunji thought about her choice. She had refused to run. She had convinced her people to stay and fight. And now they were dying because of her pride. But even as regret tore at her heart, she knew she would make the same choice again. Better to die resisting than live as slaves. In orbit, Admiral Ginho watched another of his ships die. 8 ships left now. The Velern were barely scratched. This wasn't a battle. It was a massacre, just as their commander had promised. "Sir, message from Earth Command," his communication officer said. "Text only. It says help is coming." Jinho almost laughed. Help? What help could possibly arrive in time? Earth's factories had been working around the clock for 30 days, but building a fleet took months, not weeks. This was over. They had lost, but he had bought time. 3 million people evacuated. That was 3 million human lives saved. Maybe that was enough. On the council station, Haiyan Wu stood in the public viewing gallery, watching the battle broadcast on the news feeds. Other species had gathered to watch humanity's destruction. Some looked satisfied. Others seemed uncomfortable. A few, like the Thrain delegation, appeared genuinely saddened. Haiyan Wu couldn't watch anymore. He walked out of the gallery and into the corridor, his hands shaking with rage. Ambassador Giwan found him there, his head against the wall, tears streaming down his face. "They're all going to die," he whispered. 8 million people, and we can't save them. Guan didn't have any words of comfort. What could she say? They had tried peace. They had believed in the Council, in galactic law, in the protection of civilization. And when humanity needed help, when they needed the Council to stand up to a bully, everyone had turned away. Back at New Jeju, a young man named Il Soon crawled out of a collapsed shelter. He was 19 years old, born on this world, never seen Earth. His family was dead, buried under rubble from the bombardment. Around him, his city was a smoking ruin. Above him, the sky showed the flashes of dying Earth ships. Il-sung looked up at that sky and made a promise. If he survived this, he would join whatever military Earth was building. He would learn to fight. And someday, somehow, the Velarin would pay for this. Admiral Jinho's ship shuddered as another hit got through the shields. They were down to 6 ships now, and those were barely functioning. The Velarin had stopped even trying. They were just systematically destroying the remaining human vessels, taking their time, making it last. "Admiral, we're being hailed again," his officer said. The Velarin commander appeared once more. "Admiral Sung, you have fought bravely. It changes nothing, but I acknowledge your courage. Surrender now, and I will allow your remaining ships to leave with the evacuation vessels. You've lost. Accept it with dignity." Jinho looked at his crew. Young faces, frightened faces, but every one of them ready to die if he asked. He thought about the 5 million people still on New Jeju, hiding in shelters, hoping for a miracle that wasn't coming. How long until the last evacuation ship clears the gravity well? He asked. 15 minutes, sir. Then we fight for 15 more minutes. He looked at the screen. "Commander Thexal, we're humans. We don't surrender." The Velarin commander's mandibles clicked one last time before the transmission ended. Then his fleet resumed firing. Somewhere in the darkness of space, help was indeed coming. But it would arrive too late for New Jeju. Too late for the millions who had trusted Earth to protect them. Too late to prevent humanity from learning the hardest lesson the galaxy could teach. Peace was a luxury. Survival was earned through strength. And Earth had just paid the down payment on that lesson with the blood of 5 million innocent people. 6 months after, New Jeju burned. Fleet Commander Subin Park stood on the bridge of the warship, Defiance, and watched a fleet of 340 human vessels prepare for battle. 6 months ago, this fleet didn't exist. 6 months ago, Earth had 12 patrol boats and a dream of peace. New Jeju had killed that dream. Subin was 45 years old. A former cargo ship captain who had been hauling freight between Mars and Jupiter when the call went out. Earth needs warriors. Earth needs anyone who can fight. She had volunteered because her sister lived on. New Jeju, past tense, lived. Her sister's name was carved on a memorial now, along with 5 million others. "Commander." Velarin fleet detected, announced Lieutenant Dayun Song from the tactical station. At 23, Dayun was the youngest officer on the bridge. She was also the smartest person Subin had ever met. The girl could see patterns in battle formations that veteran commanders missed. 2,000 ships, holding position at Proxima System. They're not hiding. They want us to see them. 2,000 ships. The Valoran had decided humanity needed another lesson. They had brought an armada that could shatter planets. On paper, Earth was about to lose badly. 340 ships against 2,000? But numbers didn't tell the whole story anymore. "All ships, this is Defiance Actual," Subin broadcast. "Remember your training." The Velarin think they know how to fight. They think war follows rules and traditions. They're about to learn that humans don't play by anyone's rules but our own. Execute Phoenix Protocol. Across the fleet, captains acknowledged the order. Phoenix Protocol was a strategy that had been developed in the aftermath of New Jeju. It was created by intelligence. Officer Kyung Soo Nam, a man who understood that sometimes the cruelest thing you could do was make the enemy afraid. The Velarin fleet began its advance. They moved in their traditional formation, a technique perfected over 3,000 years. It was beautiful, efficient, and completely predictable. That was their first mistake. "Launch the decoys," Subin ordered. 100 small drones shot out from the human fleet, each one broadcasting the energy signature of a full-sized warship. The Velarin sensors detected what looked like 440 human vessels. Their formation adjusted, spreading out to engage the larger force. That was their second mistake. "All ships, fire on my mark," Subin said. Target Grid 77 Alpha. Fire. The human fleet didn't aim for enemy ships. They fired at empty space, at a point where the Velern fleet would be in 30 seconds. 340 ships launched their weapons simultaneously, filling a cubic kilometer of space with nuclear mines. Each one masked to look like background radiation. The Velern fleet moved into the trap. The mines detonated in a chain reaction, the explosions feeding into each other. 40 Velern ships were destroyed instantly. Another 70 were crippled. The beautiful formation became chaos. Now, they're angry, Dayun observed. They're breaking formation, trying to close with us quickly. That was their third mistake. Aboard the Velern flagship, Supreme Commander Calvrith watched the disaster unfold with disbelief. She had conquered 17 star systems personally. She had never been ambushed like this. The humans were fighting dirty, using tactics that violated every standard of civilized warfare. All ships, pursue and destroy, she ordered. Show no mercy. The Velern fleet accelerated, their blood up, their discipline shattered by rage. They chased the human ships, which appeared to be retreating in disorder. The chase led them into a debris field from an old mining operation. Now, Subin whispered, Marine Sergeant Wenshik O had been waiting in the debris field for 3 hours. His team of 12 Marines, sealed in combat pods that looked exactly like chunks of space rock. They had oxygen for 6 hours, heat for 8. After that, they would die. But Wenshik had stopped worrying about death 6 months ago. When he watched New Jeju burn, his pod sensors detected a Velern dreadnought passing within 100 meters. All teams, activate and breach, he commanded. The combat pods came to life, firing magnetic grapples that latched onto the dreadnought's hull. Wenshik's team cut through the armor with plasma torches and poured into the ship. They were 12 humans boarding a vessel with a crew of 300 Velern. The odds should have been impossible. But Wenshik and his team had trained for this. They had studied Velern biology, learned their weaknesses. Velermen were strong but slow in tight spaces. Their armor was thick but vulnerable to sustained fire. And most importantly, they had never fought an enemy who would board their ships. It wasn't civilized. It wasn't done. The Marines moved through the dreadnought like ghosts. Using tactics from 100 years of human military history, they sabotaged the engines, destroyed the weapons control, and then fought their way to the bridge. Wenshik personally killed the ship's captain. Watching the Velern shock as a creature he considered primitive cut him down. Dreadnought captured, Wenshik reported. Crew neutralized. Across the battlefield, 40 more boarding teams executed similar operations. The Velern fleet suddenly found itself fighting enemies both outside and inside their own ships. Their formations collapsed completely. Kung Sunam watched the battle from Earth. Commandant allowed himself a thin smile. He had spent 6 months studying Velern psychology, learning how they thought, what they feared. The Velern prided themselves on honor and combat, on following the ancient traditions of warfare. So he gave them chaos. He gave them tactics they considered beneath dignity. He made them afraid, and he broadcast every moment of it across the galaxy. Sir, we're getting responses from other Council species, his aide reported. The Thrain are asking for copies of the battle footage. So are the Korvax. Even some former Velern subjects are watching, Good Kunsu said. Let them see. Let them understand that the Velern can be beaten. Fear is contagious. So is hope. Back in the battle, Captain Unibeak led a new squadron of fighters. She had survived New Jeju, barely. Now she flew a ship built with one purpose, to make the Velern pay. Her squadron used a new tactic called the Hornet Strike. They would fly at maximum speed directly at enemy ships, wait until the last possible second, then veer away while launching missiles at point-blank range. It was terrifyingly dangerous. It was also terrifyingly effective. Gold Squadron, target that command carrier Yuna ordered. Remember, we're wasps and they're bears. Fast, vicious, impossible to swat. Her squadron dove at the massive carrier. The Velern point defenses opened up, filling space with gunfire. 2 fighters exploded. 3 more were hit, but kept flying. At the last second, they fired their missiles, and peeled away. The carrier's shields, designed to stop long-range weapons, couldn't adapt fast enough to the close-range barrage. The missiles struck home. The carrier's launch bay exploded, secondary detonations ripping through its structure. It began to list dead in space. Doyun watched her tactical display and saw the patterns shifting. "Commander, the Velen are trying to withdraw. They're regrouping." "Let them go," Subin ordered. "We've made our point." As the Veleran fleet retreated, leaving behind over 300 destroyed ships, Admiral Calverth sat in her damaged flagship and tried to process what had happened. She had brought 2,000 ships. She had expected an easy victory. Instead, she had been mauled by an inferior force that fought without honor, without dignity, without following any of the established rules of galactic warfare. The humans fought like animals. They used deception, ambush, boarding actions, suicide tactics. They didn't care about glory or honor. They just wanted to win. For the first time in her 300-year life, Calverth felt fear. On the council station, the representatives watched the battle recordings in shocked silence. The Veleran had been bloodied. The species that had conquered a third of the galaxy had been forced to retreat by humans who, just 6 months ago, barely had a military ambassador. Jiwan stood before the council and spoke into that silence. "For 15 years, Earth tried to be a good member of this council. We disarmed. We trusted. We believed in your promises of protection. When the Veleran demanded our world, we asked for help. None of you answered." She paused, letting her words sink in. "New Jeju is gone. 5 million humans are dead. But Earth remembers. Earth learned. We learned that in this galaxy, peace is not earned through kindness. It's earned through strength. We tried peace. You forced us to war. Don't forget that." The council chamber remained silent. No one had any response. Back at Earth, Il-sung stood in formation with 10,000 other new recruits. He had survived New Jeju. He had made it to the evacuation ships. And true to his promise, he had enlisted the moment he reached Earth. Now, after 6 months of the hardest training humans could design, he was a Marine, his drill instructor. A grizzled veteran named Juan Park walked down the line. "You all know why you're here. You all lost something at New Jeju. Family, friends, home. The Veleran think they taught us a lesson. They're right. They taught us that we can never be weak again. They taught us that survival requires strength. Today, you stop being victims. Today, you become weapons." Il-sung stood at attention and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. The boy who had loved New Jeju's purple oceans was gone. In his place stood a soldier who would make sure no human world ever burned again. The Veleran Empress Calverth commanded 5,000 warships. It was the largest military force assembled in 200 years. She sat in her throne aboard the flagship Eternal Victory and watched the blue-green planet called Earth grow larger on the viewing screen. This was personal now. The humans had humiliated her forces at Proxima. They had revealed weakness in the Veleran war machine that could not stand. "My Empress," her admiral reported, human fleet detected. 800 ships formed in defensive grid around their homeworld. 800 ships. The humans had been busy in the 3 months since Proxima, but 800 against 5,000 was still a slaughter. Calverth would burn Earth like they had burned New Jeju. She would make the galaxy remember why no one challenged the Veleran Empire. "All ships advance," she commanded. "Show them the price of resistance." On Earth, President Taeyong-yoon stood in the command center and watched the Veleran Armada approach. 800 human ships against 5,000. Every simulation, every tactical analysis said this was unwinnable. But he had to try. Surrender meant extinction. At least if they fought, they died with dignity. "Mr. President, incoming transmission from the Galactic Council," Nate announced. The screen showed Ambassador Hyan Wu standing in the council chamber. Behind him, the assembled representatives of 100 species watched. "Mr. President, the council has voted. They're not going to intervene. They claim this is a bilateral dispute outside their jurisdiction." Kiang almost laughed. "A bilateral dispute. That's what they call genocide now. Tell them thank you for nothing. Tell them that when we're gone, They'll be next. The Veleran won't stop with Earth. But Hyanwu was smiling. It was a strange, fierce smile. Sir, I have other news. The Thrain Collective has broken neutrality. They're sending 400 ships to support us. They say they're tired of watching the Veleran conquer the galaxy. They say if humans are willing to stand, then they'll stand with us. Before Taeyong could respond, more reports flooded in. The Korvax Assembly was providing tactical data on Veleran fleet formations. 3 minor species that had been conquered by the Veleran were sending volunteer ships. Old vessels and brave crews who wanted revenge. Even individual ships from other species were breaking off from their governments to join the fight. Admiral Jinho, who had survived New Jeju and now commanded the defense fleet, smiled grimly. They're not just afraid of the Veleran anymore. They're afraid of what happens if we lose. Because if humans fall, every peaceful species in the galaxy is next. Fleet Commander Subin watched the Veleran armada approach and felt ice water in her veins. This was it. Everything humanity had built in the last 9 months would be tested here. If they lost, Earth was finished. If they won, they proved that the Veleran could be stopped. All ships, this is Defiance Actual, she broadcast. We're fighting for our home today. For our families. For every human who ever believed in peace. The Veleran took that belief and turned it into ash. Now we show them what happens when you force peaceful people to become warriors. All ships, weapons free. The battle began with the Veleran launching a massive missile barrage. Thousands of warheads designed to overwhelm the human shields. But Dayun had anticipated this. Her tactical computers had spent months analyzing Veleran attack patterns. She knew their moves before they made them. Execute Umbrella Protocol, Subin ordered. The human fleet's defensive ships activated a new technology, something Dr. Hannah Cho had been developing in secret for 15 years. She had known peace wouldn't last. She had prepared. The defensive grid created an electromagnetic pulse that detonated 90% of the incoming missiles prematurely. The remaining 10% were picked off by point defense systems. The Veleran Empress stared at her screens in disbelief. That should have crippled the human fleet. Instead, they had barely scratched them. Close to weapons range, she ordered. We'll tear them apart ship to ship. The fleets collided in the space between Earth and its moon. It was the largest space battle in galactic history. Thousands of ships maneuvering and firing, explosions lighting up the darkness like new stars. The human ships fought with a ferocity that shocked even their allies. They rammed enemy vessels when their weapons ran dry. They deployed boarding teams in the middle of fleet actions. They used every dirty trick, every underhanded tactic that civilized species had abandoned centuries ago. Sergeant Wanchik led a boarding action on a Veleran heavy cruiser. His team of 50 Marines cut through the ship like a knife, killing everything they found. The Veleran fought hard, but they were designed for open combat, for honorable duels. Wanchik's people fought like cornered rats, using grenades in close quarters, setting traps, showing no mercy. The bridge is secure, Wanchik reported, standing over the bodies of the command crew. Turning this ship's weapons on the enemy fleet now, across the battlefield. Dozens of captured Veleran ships suddenly turned their guns on their former allies. The Veleran formation began to crack. Captain Unibeek's fighter squadron executed the maneuver they had been saving for this moment. 500 fighters, loaded with a new type of weapon. They dove through the Veleran fleet, weaving between capital ships too fast to track. Each fighter carried a single quantum disruptor, Dr. Hannah's masterpiece. A weapon so terrible that even Hannah had wept when she finished it. All fighters target the command ship, Yuna ordered. We're going to cut the head off the snake. Fighters closed on the Eternal Victory, the Veleran flagship. The defensive fire was intense. Yuna watched fighters explode around her, good people dying to give her a clear shot. She thought about New Jeju, about her family, about every human who had died because the Veleran thought they could take whatever they wanted. For New Jeju, she whispered, and fired. The quantum disruptor hit the Eternal Victory's shields and passed through them like they didn't exist. The weapon burrowed into the ship's hull and activated. What happened next was something no one had ever seen before. The disruptor created a cascade failure in the ship's power systems. the energy feedback jumping to nearby vessels. Like dominoes falling, one Velern ship after another lost power, their systems overloading. 300 ships went dark in 30 seconds. In the command center on Earth, Dr. Hannah Cho watched her weapon work and felt sick. The quantum disruptor was effective. It was also horrifying. Ships didn't just lose power. Their crews died, suffocated or frozen, as life support failed. It was a clean death, the analyst said. But Hannah knew there was no such thing as a clean death. Dr. Cho, President Taeyang, said gently, "You saved Earth today." "I killed 10,000 beings today," Hannah replied. "Don't make me a hero for that." Gone the eternal victory, emergency power. Kicked in just enough for Empress Calverth to see the battle turning against her. Her fleet was being torn apart.
Oh.
The humans and their allies were winning. How? How had these primitives, these children who barely understood space travel, managed to defeat the Velern Empire? The answer came to her as she watched a human boarding team breach her flagship. They didn't win through superior technology or numbers. They won through sheer, desperate, vicious determination. They fought like creatures with nothing left to lose, because they had nothing left to lose. The Velern had taken everything else. Admiral Jinho made the call. "All ships, Velern command vessel is disabled. Enemy fleet is in retreat. Pursue but do not engage beyond the moon's orbit. Let them go." The surviving Velern ships, barely half of what they had started with, limped away from Earth. The greatest armada the Empire had ever assembled had been broken by a species that didn't even have a military a year ago. In the council chamber, the assembled species watched in stunned silence. The Velern, the species that had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years, had been defeated. By humans, by the weakest species in the council. Hyan Wu stood before them once more. He was tired. He had lost friends at New Jeju. He had watched his species transform from peaceful explorers into weapons of war. But he needed to say this. The galaxy needed to hear it. 15 years ago, Earth joined this council with hope in our hearts. We believed in cooperation, in peace, in the rule of law. We dismantled our military because we trusted you to protect us. When the Velorn threatened our colony, we asked for help. None came. When they killed 5 million of our people, you watched. You did nothing. He paused, his voice growing harder. We tried peace. We tried so hard to be the species you wanted us to be. Harmless, compliant, weak. The Velorans saw that weakness and attacked. They thought we had forgotten how to fight. They were wrong, you remembered. And in remembering, we learned something about this galaxy. Hyan Wu looked at each delegation, making eye contact with species that had turned their backs on humanity. Peace is not a virtue in this galaxy. It's a luxury that only the strong can afford. You taught us that. The Velorn taught us that. So here's what happens now. Earth will maintain the largest military fleet in Council space. We will protect ourselves, because we know now that no one else will. And if you ever threaten human worlds again, if any species decides to test us, we will remind you why we chose peace in the first place. Not because we couldn't fight, but because you couldn't survive us when we did. He walked out of the chamber. Behind him, the council dissolved into chaos. Some species protested. Others called for humanity to be expelled. But the Thrain delegation stood and applauded. So did a dozen other species, smaller voices that had lived in fear of the Velorn for generations. On Earth, President Taeyang stood at the memorial for New Jeju. 5 million names carved in stone. Among them was Il-sung's family. The young man stood nearby in his Marine uniform, having survived the battle. He had fought on a boarding team, had killed Velorn soldiers, had done his part. "We tried peace," President Taeyang said softly. "We really tried." Il-sung looked at the names. His mother, his father, his little sister. All gone because Earth had chosen to trust in the kindness of the galaxy. "Sir, what now?" "Now." Taeyan smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Now we make sure no one ever forces us to choose between peace and survival again. We build, we grow strong. We remember what this cost. And we pray that someday, maybe centuries from now, we can choose peace again. But this time we choose it from a position of strength. Above them, Earth's new fleet orbited in protective formations. 800 ships, with more being built every day. Factory worlds churned out weapons. Training centers produced soldiers. Earth had transformed into something it swore it would never become. A military power, but they had survived. And in a galaxy where the strong preyed on the weak, survival was victory enough. The war was over. The Velern had retreated to their territory, their empire shaken, their reputation destroyed. Humanity had won. But Taeyang knew the truth. There were no winners in war, only survivors. Earth had survived. That would have to be enough. He looked up at the stars and whispered one more time, "We tried peace. We really, really tried."